Good evening. Welcome to Inside Out. I'm Pat Smith, and this is where we take you inside state, local, and federal government to bring information out to you. Helping me do that tonight is our newly elected at-large member of the County Council, Will Jawando. Will, thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you, Pat.
Great. Would you tell us a little bit, and our viewers, a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a council member at large, and that just means I represent the whole county. And there are 4 at-large members, 5 district members, basically go east to west, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I live in District 5 in the eastern part of the county, but am very proud to represent the whole county as an at-large member. And as you know, we're a big county, 1.1 million people, 500 square miles, and so it's a big responsibility. And I've been here my whole life. I don't know if you want to talk about my background, but I grew up here, born and raised. So my dad came to this country in the 70s to go to school from Nigeria. He was fleeing a civil war and found his way to a small town in Kansas, Hays, Kansas, where my mom was born. And they got together at Fort Hays State University and moved east for economic opportunity and also for better understanding of their interracial relationship.
Right.
Right. And people, so.
Not too many of them in Kansas.
No. Especially not in the 70s. Yeah. The people
Right.
weren't that excited about it. So they moved and settled in the Long Branch area of Silver Spring, which is where I grew up, and had a great experience, and I'm still here. My wife and I, we have 4 children, just had a little boy 2 months ago, and then we have 3 older girls. My wife's from New York, and so we've been here, and I've seen the area change over the last 40 years, and as I'm sure you have.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I've been practicing law here, and it's my 41st year in Montgomery County, so it's been a ride.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Really, the change, and it just continues. You drive, no matter where you drive, all this construction of apartments and townhouses. I don't know where the people are going to come, but they do the demographics on their investment.
Well, if you look at when I was born, into now, just in that 35 plus years, we've almost doubled in size. Gone from about 600,000 residents to
nearly 1.2.
So it's been a dramatic growth, and I think it's a good thing. And we've diversified greatly. I'm sure you've seen that. Now 1 in 3 residents were born in another country. If you count their children, like me, children of immigrants, you get up to almost 45% of the county are either born in another country or first generation. So we've and as that all happened in that time frame, pretty much.
Well, and that's something that I wanted to talk to you about on that is the growth of my minority and diversity and all that in the county, because I remember there was a press conference just recently addressing that, the diversity and the gap.
You're talking about racial equity.
Racial equity and also the economic gap.
Yeah.
What was the direction of the council on that, the purpose of that?
Sure. So we had a big town hall. We had a press conference and a town hall later that evening, basically talking. The previous council passed a resolution saying that we want to have a racial equity lens on all of the policies that we pass. And since we are so diverse, we should be intentionally looking at, just like we look at the fiscal impact of a bill, we should be looking at what are the impacts on our very diverse communities here, and realizing that there are significant gaps in education outcomes and health and income between our communities of color and diverse communities. And so I have to commend our council president, Navarro, who led that effort, and my other colleagues, and we all talked about our experiences personally, but also the constituents we represent, that we want to make sure that Montgomery County remains a place where everyone can have opportunity. And so digging into, in an intentional way, what are the things that are holding certain communities back? What are the barriers? What does this policy have to say about those impacts, and how can we be intentional? So that's what we did, and we had the first of a series of town hall meetings with people to talk about how they've been impacted and what ideas they have. And it touched on every issue, housing and education and criminal justice reform and the environment. And so, because those issues, it cuts across any issue. So We're going to have more of those discussions, and I think by the end of the year, the goal is to have some legislation that sets up a process for when any policy the council is considering, and even when I'm not there anymore and we're gone, that every council will have to consider what the equity and racial equity impact is of that bill or of that policy and factor that into their decision making. Because we should have been doing that going back, but now there should be a systemized way that we do it. So I think that's the goal, and we want to get a lot of community input on it.
Well, as you mentioned, law enforcement, you have introduced a bill already that has become known now as the LETT bill, L-E-T-T, because law enforcement trust and transparency.
You remember, that's pretty good.
What is that bill intended to do?
So basically, we named it that because that's what it's intended to do. It's intended to restore and improve trust and transparency with our law enforcement entities, our agency, our police department, and our residents. So it does two main things. One, in the case of the unfortunate but situation that happens when a resident is killed by a police officer because of use of force, that our police should not be investigating that act to see whether the criminal charges should be filed. So it would create the process by which we form a relationship with either a federal, state, or local law enforcement agency to come in and do that independent investigation to see if any wrongdoing has happened. So that's the first step, and that's a recommendation that was part of President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force. Look, in this country, we have a history of unequal police treatment, and we've seen it more because of cell phone usage over the last few years. You've seen the Black Lives Matter movement and other things. And so we had the impetus for this was we had a unarmed African-American man, Robert White, was killed in Silver Spring about 8 months ago, walking in the neighborhood, the same walk he did every day, and was confronted by a police officer, and that interaction ended up in him being killed. And the answers that the community got and his family got were not sufficient. And so the second part of the bill is, the first is independent investigation by an outside law enforcement agency. The second part is that there should be a public reporting. If charges are not filed, or if they are, the public should know what happened and should get a report about that investigation. In the case of Robert White, that didn't happen. All we got was a 2-sentence letter saying charges will not be filed, didn't say why. And so it's very important that in order for the community to trust the police and for the police to be able to do their jobs effectively, that there's that trust and cooperative relationship. And so my goal with this bill, and I'm proud that all 8 of my colleagues have co-sponsored the bill, and my understanding is that the county executive is in support of it as well, is that this is a step forward in that area when we have these very difficult situations. Our police department does a great job. I actually worked for our police department right out of high school as an AmeriCorps volunteer and wanted to be in law enforcement for a long time, so I deeply respect what they do. Then I decided to become a lawyer. But we have to we're in a different era of policing, and the communities have to have trust for it to work, and police will tell you that too. So this is a start of a conversation, and it's a part of the conversation when you have these unfortunate incidences, when police kill residents or are involved in the death of a resident. But we're going to need to do more around profiling and stops. The police just released their use of force statistics this week, and we saw that over 70% of the people arrested in 2018 were people of color, either black or Latino. And African Americans made up 55% of the arrests, but we only make up about 18% of the population. And so we need to dig into that data and why is that happening, and what are the priorities of the police department, and are we doing community policing? So we have an opportunity with that with the police chief search as well. And I know we were talking about that a little bit before we came on air, but I think we have an opportunity in hiring a new police chief for the first time in 15 years to really ask some questions about what's your view of policing? Do you think we should be doing community policing? Should we be tracking success based on arrests or community involvement? And I think it should be community involvement. And so I think there'll be a robust discussion on that as well in the context of my bill, but also the police chief search.
Because on the flip side also, it should be helpful too, as you mentioned, the police officers themselves. because we are in an age of officers being under attack. And that's not good.
No.
And I think it all started with the incident down in Florida with that
With Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon Martin got killed. That police, no one thinks twice about shooting at them or hitting them or fighting back with them. When I was growing up, that isn't the way you did it.
Well, we've seen, look, we've seen a deterioration of the relationship over time. Look, in the South, police, we can't not acknowledge the history of policing. In the South particularly, they were gangs that were formed to capture slaves who had escaped, and there's a history there. But I would agree with you. I think the advent of cell phone technology and some of the things that have happened over the past 3 to 5 years in particular have made it even worse. Now, in our inner cities and communities of color, it's, there's been, if you go back to the Rodney King riots, there's been issues for a long time. Yeah. Oh. But I think we are in an era now where we're in a different era. And so for police to be safe, for communities to be safe, there has to be that trust and respect. And I think policies like independent investigations and transparency in the reporting can help get us there.
Sure, certainly. Now, when we're talking about the whole disparity of race here in the county, one thing that you emphasized in your campaign was affordability of housing. Yeah. We're having trouble keeping first responders as residents here in the county because of how expensive it is to live here. Yeah. What can be done with that? When you say, you promise affordability in housing,
sure.
What's going to be done?
Well, it's a big challenge. We were an innovator here in the county in the 70s with the MPDU program, moderately priced dwelling units, which was kind of the first type of inclusionary zoning. But we haven't really kept up with that, and there's big time need, whether there's workforce housing for our teachers and our firefighters and our law enforcement officers, or our low-income residents who are working 2 jobs, but may only be making $50,000 for a family of 4, but they're working hard. They have trouble finding housing, and so I think there's a couple things we can do. One, we should look at and reevaluate our MPDU program. Should the threshold, which has been set at 12.5% for a long time, and that's how much affordability that developers, if they build a new community or development, are supposed to adhere to, or can we raise that number to a higher number? I think we should look at that. What are the income requirements? We should look at those because right now it's set at a level that isn't necessarily considered affordable. You have to be making about $70,000 a year to qualify. And the other thing we can do is we need to leverage county-owned land. We had a debate about this yesterday in the council. Every place we own county land and developers are interested in either upzoning or using that land, we should be leveraging maximum affordability. And I think we can work with new nonprofit developers and others to do that. I think those are some of the things we can do. There's no silver bullet. We obviously have to get wages up too. The economy's connected to this. If you get people earning more, they can, spend more on housing. But I think it's going to take looking at our programs and our subsidies, expanding the base of developers that we're talking to, and really leveraging county-owned land. I think those are starts to the conversation. And then it's really how do we grow our economy and get people in jobs that pay a living wage so that they can afford it. I think that's part of it too.
We'll get back to that. All right, time for us to take a quick break.
Sounds good.
I'm Pat Smith. This is Inside Out. We'll be right back.
I understand. I know it's not your typical resume.
Okay, well.
But candidate. But I've been working double shifts just to pay for books. I've been raising my 2 little brothers. I'm determined, driven, motivated. Isn't that what you're looking for?
Look beyond the resume and discover new ways to develop great talent at gradsoflife.org.
Welcome back. You're watching Inside Out, where we take you inside state, local, and federal government to bring information out to you. Will Jawando, our newly elected council member at large here in Montgomery County, is helping me do that here tonight. What committees are you serving on now?
So I am on the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, which is short for PHED, P-H-E-D. And that handles a lot of the land use, the zoning, the master plans for the county, also anything in economic development. So it's a pretty big committee. Much of the council's authority is hones in around land use issues and housing and planning. And then I'm on the Education and Culture Committee. It was renamed, and culture was added because it also includes arts and humanities and libraries. And I'm actually the lead for libraries. And so in addition to the funding for MCPS and for Montgomery College, we also do everything dealing with our arts and humanities and libraries community. And we have 22 libraries in the county, 21 public branches, and then one in the jail in Clarksburg. That's a branch as well. So I'm on those two committees, and it's been a good nexus for us, and because my background is as a civil rights attorney is working in education policy and workforce policy, and so I'm happy to be on those committees.
Great. Now, you've also, I read where you had sent a letter to the county executive regarding the selection of a new police chief.
Yes.
And calling for transparency in that. It's a kind of a personnel selection type thing.
Yeah.
And do you think they're going to allow that kind of transparency in selecting and hiring a police chief?
I think so, and I hope so. One of the things that I wrote in the letter was that while normally the council defers to the executive on how to set up a process for a director level position, and I think that's proper, this pick is different. We are in an era, as we were talking about earlier, where the relationship between the public and police has been strained, and the trust level is not as high as it should be. And we have an opportunity now to kind of hit the reset button and have the community give some input about what they think policing should look like in the 21st century. And I think our neighbors in Baltimore County have set up a process, which I mentioned in the letter, where they have community input. They have county council and other people that are hosting town halls and forums to give input on what are the qualities that they want in a chief, but also are helping to interview candidates. And I think that type of robust process only sets us up for more success down the road when the new chief is on board. Obviously, the county executive has the final say, and the council has to confirm his nominee, his pick. But I think having a robust engagement process that's transparent on the front end will really help that new chief do their job going forward. And so, and again, didn't expect this, but all my colleagues signed that letter with me, so we're continuing the conversation with the county executive about what that should look like. But I think he agrees that, look, policing is different. You have to have the community buy-in for it to work, and we've had the same chief for 15 years. So this is things have changed, and we should take a fresh look at it.
Right. Now, but Chief Manger has done a lot of work in trying to build the trust and transparency. I just don't know how much input the public should have in selecting a police chief. In Howard County, right after the election, their chief indicated that he was going to resign.
Yes.
In the matter of a couple of weeks, a woman who retired as a captain the previous January was asked if she would come back as chief. And bada boom, bada bing, they're just moving.
Right.
And it's done. And I know we have deputy chiefs in the county that are very, very well qualified. I think they could would bring a fresh perspective, despite the fact that they're so rooted in the community. At least they know the community.
Well, and I think we have some great candidates that are internal candidates, and my view is, the cream rises to the top. I like competition. I think if you bring in some other people and they're in the mix, and I think they might have a leg up in the process. But we get one bite at the apple. This next chief might not serve 15 years, but they'll probably serve 5 to 10 years, or depending on.
15 was a long.
Yeah, that
time.
was a long time. And we talked about my bill earlier in the context that we've had the shooting of Robert White, and we have some questions about why certain communities are being arrested and stopped more than others. We have some serious questions that we need to confront from a policy perspective. I think I'll give you a perfect example. My understanding of how police are rated today in their precincts or their districts is they have a big board that says how many arrests did you get this week, how many types of arrests in different areas, and they're measuring it success based on arrests or stops, as opposed to, hey, how many diversions did I have? How many community events did I go to? So it's a different way, and I think the public, to your point of what's the role of the public, what's the role of the public, I think they could say, hey, we think you should be considering more of these things as opposed to that, and what's your view on it? And being able to ask people that and give input to the county executive ahead of time about what people think policing should look like in this new era, I think that's what this is designed to do. It's obviously his choice, but he should go into it, and a council should do their confirmation role with clear eyes, knowing what the community is asking for. And so that's what I'm hoping we'll do, and I think the county executive agrees with that. And in the meantime, we have some great internal candidates that can keep the ship running, but let's take our time and get the right person in.
Well, as you said, it was very, very apropos. The cream will rise to the top. Let's see how it all shakes out. It may well be someone from the that's already in there internally.
Right. No, very well could be.
But very well, yeah. Now, the Planning and Housing
And
Economic Development Committee is, as you said, a lot to go on. But what authority does it have in actually controlling what kind of affordable housing developers have to make available in a project?
So the council has, and our committee is the first step in that process. Obviously, all council members get to vote on everything, but the Fed committee is the first stop for any master plan, any change in zoning, any ZTA, which is zoning text amendment, which is a amendment to the zoning code. And so, for example, if a developer had a piece of land that currently had 500 units on it because of the zoning, and they would like to redevelop and go up to 2,000 units. This was an example we had yesterday as part of the Veers Mill master plan. Our committee in the council has the authority to upzone that property, and we have the exclusive authority. The executive doesn't have zoning authority. It's the council that has the zoning and land use. So quite a bit, to answer your question, we have quite a bit of influence on how big, how high, how dense the area can be populated, how high a building can go, what are the setback requirements, so how close does your neighbor's house have to be to someone else. We're also debating right now, I think, what is a good proposal to help affordable housing, which is allowing more accessory dwelling units or tiny houses or basement apartments that are separate, but that can be more affordable either for a young person returning home or a senior citizen that wants to stay with their family and be able to afford the house. And so we're currently taking up the accessory dwelling unit law, and we're looking at things about height and setback requirements and parking. So we have broad authority in all those areas. And also we can set the amount of affordability that's required. I mentioned the moderately priced dwelling unit program, MPDUs, currently set at 12.5%. But one of the things I'd like to see us consider is moving that up to maybe 15%. And so we play a big role in working with the development community, with community organizations, with civic associations, and trying to set a policy and a zoning framework that's going to do what I think is where we should be moving more towards more transit-oriented development, towards better pedestrian safety. That's a huge issue. We just had a young man, 3-year-old boy killed yesterday right off of Veers Mill, run over by an SUV. Almost daily we're hearing about pedestrians being hit. And so a big focus of this council and our planning process and our committee is how do we make streets more safe and friendly for pedestrians and bicyclists, and slow people down a little bit so that we can, we're different. We were talking about this before the show, when 40 years ago, there weren't that many pedestrians walking out in those parts of the county. And so the speed limits and the way the roads were designed for a different era. And this idea of complete streets that are safe for both bicyclists, for pedestrians, for walkers, for bus rapid transit that we need in the county to move us more quickly. So those are things that all dealing in our committee that we have pretty wide jurisdiction to talk about.
Right. I think that, when we were talking about disparity of racial backgrounds and people from all over the world living here in the county, that is a problem with pedestrian behavior.
Sure.
I mean, the way people just cross the street willy-nilly, you're not in some underdeveloped nation where there aren't cars coming by every
Right.
second. You're on North Washington Street in downtown Rockville.
Right.
Don't just walk right across the middle of the block.
Right. Well, one of the things we're trying to do is how do you, there's certainly an education component, but there's some places that to get to a signalized crosswalk, you may have to walk
True.
3/4 of a mile or half a mile. And so how do we make those more regular so that you can have more of an opportunity? But you're right. I mean, there's an education component for sure. But at the end of the day, we don't want to, we're seeing pedestrian deaths go up and we don't want that.
Yeah. Certainly not. But here's one problem that the county can address, and I've taken it up, brought it to other
Sure.
members of the council over the years' attention. We have ride-on bus stops in the middle of a block
Right.
with no crosswalk.
Right.
And people get off the ride-on bus
They have no choice but to
walk
cross illegally.
to cross, the street to their, I'm thinking, College Parkway in Rockville is, Watts Branch on the right, so there isn't any housing for a long section. They all live over in Plymouth Woods, so it stops and people all just cross the street there.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, that's part of what we're looking at with Vision Zero is how do you make access to transit better and safer. And that's a huge problem. I think we actually have on Colesville Road near Trader Joe's what was deemed the worst bus stop in the state as far as safety and accessibility. It's just there's nothing around it. There's no way to get to it. And so that's certainly something that we're looking at in trying to update those stops in those areas so that you can get to them more safely.
Right. So there's plenty to look at and plenty to do coming on to the council as a new person. Could you tell our viewers how they would be able to get in touch with you?
Sure.
You seem to be very transparent.
That's a big goal for ours. We really take seriously the opportunity to be in contact with everyone from around the county. And so our website is Montgomery County MD.gov is the council website. Click on council. And then you can get me at Councilmember.Jawando, Jawando, at MontgomeryCountyMD.gov. And then I'm also on social media. I'm on Twitter and Facebook at Councilmember Will Jawando. And easy to find, and I hope people reach out and come visit us in Rockville.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure having you, and we'll look forward to seeing you
Good to
continue with these endeavors.
Have me back.
Okay, we'll do that. I'm Pat Smith. You've been watching Inside Out. Have a good evening.